My name is Will Beres. Today is March 23rd, 2026. The time is 4:40 p.m. We are at the Pewaukee VFW. I'm interviewing Peter Harken, who was born on August 18th, 1937 in Surabaya, Java. He served during the Vietnam War period between 1961 and 1966. Peter Harken was a sergeant third class in the Army and served as in charge of the reserves motor pool and worked on medical equipment.
That's right. You got it, Will.
So, what were you doing when you first enlisted?
I was at the University of Wisconsin at the time, and I was also working for Gilson Medical Electronics, and it, it was in between time that the draft board had warned me, that I was coming up to be enlisted, and but they said you have this important job at Gilson Medical Electronics that has to do with the Army, and you can stay there and do that, continue with that until you're finished, and then the day you finish, you're going back on the draft list. So I said, okay, that's the way it went. So that took about a year. Well, the project took me about almost 2 years, and that project was a rather interesting in that I was in a development section of Gilson Medical Electronics, and I was asked to take on a project that the Army had asked GME or Gilson Medical Electronics to try and make, and that was a an encephalograph. Uh, the machines that you find in the hospital that test your heart out. And at that time, they had these little pens, so on. The transistors weren't in it, being used at that time. So the normal encephalograph was about as big as a refrigerator, an icebox. And they asked me to make one that does the same thing, but to put it in a package small enough that a medic could carry it by handle. So it was a huge step down, and and that's why it took me so long to pack everything in from the big refrigerator, but different, different miniature size, everything into this aluminum box here that had a handle on it, and then I had the design and everything, and it was carryable, and so yeah, I had to spend quite a bit of time on it, and after I completed it and it worked and so on, that's when the draft board and everything found out that I was then let free of that I was bait for them to take me. They said either you do that or you enlist now and you can spend 2 years in the Army, go through normal things, or you can go into the reserves and then you do your monthly meetings and weekly and go to summer camp up at Camp McCoy for about 5 years, and every summer for 2 weeks up there and do that. I decided to do that because I still wanted to get through school, and I had other things to do like sailing, skiing, and every other sport that I should be doing. I was on the swimming team, and the coach there said, I got into UW on a swimming scholarship, uh, probably because of all that training we had done ourselves in swimming out to the LSTs that were coming in, with these practice guys. So my brother and I had done a lot of swimming in the surf and stuff, and we got pretty good at it. And in fact, it was a World War II pilot of the Dauntless dive bombers, Bob. What, forgot his last name. Anyway, Bob Dudley, from the famous Dudley family of Wausau, Wisconsin. 5 brothers, 3 of them were killed. They were in the Battle of Midway, and Bob was a neighbor of ours in the Philippines, and he had asked me. He said, "Where do you think you want to go to school after high school here?" And I said, "I really don't know yet." And he said, "Well, maybe I can make up your mind." He said, "I think I can get you a full scholarship to go to UW-Madison," because he was a boxer at Madison and pretty well-known guy. And he did it, you know. He got the coaches to believe in it. So I got this scholarship, which I believe I didn't really deserve, but was there. And so that's what I did at UW-Madison. I was on the swimming team.
All right. Oh,
Oh, go ahead.
okay. Going back to the Army, where did you go for basic training?
Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. They had the soldiers all had another name for that place, which we can't say here. Have you guys been to Fort Leonard Wood? Oh yeah, well, you know what it's like. Yeah, it's not like digging foxholes that are totally made out of stone, or whatever. So
So,
anyway, that's where I spent basic training.
what were living conditions like there?
Where the what?
The living conditions like?
You mean at Leonard Wood
Yes.
or where? Oh, it was normal. The bunk houses, I think a lot of them were what we call the Quonset house, the ones like that with metal and stuff. Pretty Second World War type crews. So we were in there with a company of soldiers, and they got us up at a horrible time every morning and made us do everything they didn't want to do. So
What was the worst thing about basic training?
doing it. It actually wasn't bad, because of the swimming stuff and everything. I was in pretty good shape, so the marches and the long distance walking and the whole thing, it really didn't bother me at the time. It was just, I had to do it. Okay, so
After basic training, where did you go?
I went back to Madison, and then that was about the time when I had just sort of learned how to really ski and stuff like that, and then I made up my mind that I think I should really learn how to ski much better than I am. Of course, uh, I'd never been in land of ice and snow, so didn't know anything about it. but I got, I think the DNA was in me because my father was Dutch, my mother was Swedish. They're both ice cold countries and so on. So I think that was in me, and I just wanted to learn how to really do both of them really well. So so that's what I did. I called my old man, and he's in the Philippines, about 10,000 miles away. And I told him, Dad, I got a proposition. He was very quiet, and he said, "Okay, what is it?" And I told him, why I think I should go skiing for my own safety in the future if I'm caught in northern Alaska or somewhere blizzard conditions and ice and snow, that I know how to handle it. He said, I told him I think that's part of his life. He didn't say a word, not a word. You I'd be on the phone with him. Dad, are you there? He said, yeah, I'm here, son. Go ahead. So I just kept yakking away. And here I am, El Stupido, trying to convince a guy who had just come out of a Japanese prison camp for 5 years, and giving him this big line of crap about about winter living and everything, like he didn't know he was an ice skater. my my mother was a skier and the whole thing, and he just stayed totally quiet. And then when I went silent, he said, I could hear him, son, yeah, Dad, yeah, Dad. He said, oh, that was very interesting. And he said, you know what? I think you should too. I think you should take off when you got to do it, and just let us know how you're doing, and so on. Click, went the phone. And at that point, I believe that I think my funds to school have been cut off, which it did. He did. He cut them off. And he said, anytime you need some help, he said, give me a ring and so on. And he said, I possibly might help you out if you're doing any good in grades or anything. He said, otherwise, you're suggested you live on your own and do your own things, and I wish you good luck. Boom, click. He was of the old school, he really. And I sat there sort of dumbfounded and said, oops. So I packed up my 51 Chevy convertible and my dog. And I had a dog all the time. And took off the next morning for Aspen. Just started trailering big semis going down the highways. In other words, I was sucked away. I was just trying to save gas. So I got right on their rear bumper and I basically got sucked out to Denver. The truck drivers didn't like it at all, but that's how I ended up in Aspen, finally. My dog had 6 inches of snow on top of his head, and because we left the top down the whole way because my skis couldn't go through the convertible top or anything. Yeah. So so I spent the whole winter out there, and yeah, I got to learning skiing pretty well because I ended up working for the U.S. ski team uh, as a bus boy and making their beds and stuff like that and so on. And then they found out where I was from, Philippines and stuff. And the ski team, I became their mascot. They said, we're gonna teach you how to ski. They said it ain't gonna be pretty, not what you're seeing on the hill and everything there, but you're gonna really survive. And they were right. They pounded it into me, and so by the time I was heading back to Wisconsin in May, so on, I was pretty decent skier at that point.
Right. This is kind of jumping around a little bit, but you said you were in the reserves. What did you do or what was your duty when you were serving the reserves?
In the, I was in a motor pool, working because mechanically I was pretty decent at that point. So I was working on our equipment, tanks and trucks and stuff like that. And I was still a private and so on. But later on, I became a sergeant, I think E3. And then I was put in charge of the motor pool in the Madison unit. And that's where I ended up, actually.
During your free time in the reserves, what were you doing?
All the free time? Madison has a lot of good bars, which I had attended about all of them during my school years. So of course I went there, and but I got into the sailing club very quickly, and I also became head of the ski club, and then I learned the ice boat, ice sail, and I really caught on to that, you know. And Madison has a very good group of ice boaters there, so I ended up working on their boats and stuff with them a lot until I settled down and went back to school. But I still was doing that on the side all the time. Yeah.
After your time in the reserves, what did you do?
I stayed working for Gilson Medical Electronics, and actually the company offered me a really great position. The Dr. Gilson, wanted me to be the second head of the company besides him. And I said, Doc, I said, that's too much. He said, I'm not ready for that. So on. You're picking the wrong guy. And he says, no, I'm not. And he said, you think about it and then come back and tell me what you want to do. So I did think about it. I said, what I wanted to do was make fittings and fix boats and stuff. And that was another stupid decision uh, because it was a very good offer, you know. And anyway, he took it well, and I stayed there working on development and so on until, in the meantime, though, I had what's so-called invented or come up with the first pulleys, that had the white nylon balls in them and so on, and because there was nothing like it in the market, and I always thought that the blocks should run a lot easier and so on. And I actually learned that from ice boating because your reactions have to be very quick, otherwise you're like that. And so I ended slowly transitioning from Gilson Medical Electronics. He let me work there all the time on the side after hours and so on, and developing the hardware for the sailboats, something that would make the lines go through easier and quicker, so on. And that hardware really took off, you know. And the way it kind of took off on its own was that Peter Barrett from Pewaukee and Lowell North, they both got together. Lowell was North Sails and had the fastest starboat sails in the world. And Barrett was his crew. Barrett was an amazing guy. And then they went. I made all the gear for their boats and the Olympic team. And it was in Acapulco where they got the gold medal in the star class. And then all of a sudden, the Europeans started looking at this stuff, and it started to catch on, until my brother and I went full time into it.
All right. Transitioning back to the Army, did you learn any life lessons from your time in the service?
Did you say life?
Yes, life lessons.
Yeah, I learned something from the Army. Never volunteer. Volunteer because it's going to be worse than what you were in. Always, you know. So I didn't. I didn't volunteer. I was just taken. Oh,
All right.
yeah.
Um, Also, what do you think was your most important contribution while you were in the Army?
What was my contribution?
Yeah, what do you think your most important one was?
Um, Probably never volunteering, or well, they wanted me on the swimming team, but I would have had to stay in for another 2 years, and I didn't want to do that. So I didn't do that, and I basically just stayed in, behaved myself, went to the bars and did all that kind of stuff that you shouldn't be doing, and got through the army a lot quicker. And because I did want to get back and really work on the equipment for sailboats. Yeah,
Um,
didn't contribute much.
um, what would you say the transition back to civilian life was like?
Oh, not hard, because the minute we weren't on duty or something like that, we were back to civilian life, and and that's really what I wanted to get back to. I was fine in the army. I didn't mind it. Didn't mind all the stuff we had to do, and thought about what my dad had gone through and so on. So I kept my mouth shut and just did what I was supposed to do.
All right. Speaking of your dad, and just going back to your
Yeah.
childhood, why were you living in the Dutch East Indies or Indonesia as a child?
Oh, because like I said, my father was Dutch and my mother was Swedish, but they had met by chance. My grandfather owned a fleet of Liberty type ships, three or four of them, freighters that went from Holland to basically South America and stuff, picking up fruits and everything and bringing them back. And he was doing pretty well, you know. And my mother, though they weren't married, my mother ended up she was a gymnastics teacher. She was quite good at it, and she and about four or five other good-looking blonde Swedish girls uh, ended up in a bar on vacation in Havana, Cuba. And that's where my grandfather's ships would always land, and then I was crew on the ships, and so I and several other dirty Dutchmen, so on, ended up going to that bar by chance, and we saw these good-looking blonde girls there, and my father made a beeline for one of them. That was my mother, and they got to know each other quite well, and so on. And then within a year, they were married. Yeah. So that's how my father and my mother got together, so on. And yeah, they were together from then on, you know. But but in their own country, in Holland and in Sweden at the time, and and then they ended up living in Holland, in Amsterdam, and he was still with Caterpillar, and he he was with Caterpillar all the time during the war too, but of course he was a prisoner of war, so couldn't do anything at the time. So
Um, so you were or he was a prisoner of war. How did you escape being taken or
We
just
we
living under the Japanese?
we ran fast. No, no. The, we had heard, and he kept tabs on it. You know that the Japanese. Well, first of all, we were getting basically bombed every night from Japanese bombers, uh, and and we would spend our dinner time. This was during the night they would do it, and so during dinner time at night, my brother and I and my mother and my father would eat dinner underneath the dining room table because the wood was really quite thick. It's the strongest part of the house, and so we would sit there eating dinner while the stuff was exploding around us, and basically just praying that they don't hit the house directly, which they never did. They got the garage and so on, and we were doing that for several months before he had worked out a scheme to get us to Borneo, which was totally on the east side of Sumatra, the island that we were at. And so we ended up in Balik. It's called Balikpapan. It's alive today in Borneo, east side of Borneo, and it was there that we managed to. My mother, by then, my father had separated from our family. He joined the small Dutch army, and so a lot of the men did. A lot of the men died, and they were getting the women and children out of the area. And I don't know, we went through the jungles and stuff of Borneo and ended up in Balikpapan and waited it out. She went hunting looking for a ship or something that could take us out, and she found it, and so we ended up on that ship that was going to Australia, to Melbourne, and we ended up in Melbourne, and then looked for a place to stay. And uh, during that time, Second World War, there was a lot of civilians and so on that owned houses were in there, and they were helping refugees to come live with them, while they were waiting it out. And that's what we did when we were there until she found a ship called a Lurline, which became an American ship uh, that that did Hawaii cruises from San Francisco to Hawaii, and now it was commandeered to be a troop ship and rescue ship. So she managed to get us on that, and it was kind of interesting. Our cabin was, everything was painted gray steel everywhere, the whole thing. And we get in this cabin, and there was the coat of arms of the King and Queen of England engraved on the cabin. It was their official cabin, and but now it was just used as a bunk place.
Hmm.
So every I think it was every 2 hours, every 2 to 4 hours, they would get us up and do life jacket duty. In other words, we'd have to don our life jackets at 2 in the morning or 4 o'clock or so on, and put them on and go up on top deck where we were designated to do, and stand there basically not at attention, but stand there and just wait to get what the next call was going to be. And in most cases, the call was done by a horn or sound that, I think they were about half an hour, half an hour apart, something like that. And but then one night we got that called to do the same thing, much closer to than the one we had before, and that meant, something now is happening, and that's when we met up with that Japanese submarine, you know, and thankfully he didn't hit us, you know. He was a good guy, and I really hope to this day that he made it through the war, because he sure deserved it, because he broke every rule in the Japanese army for how you take care of prisoners and so on. Yeah, a good man. And then we ended up in San Francisco. It was about a 2-week, 3-week trip, and we ended up in San Francisco, and then getting hooked up with this older Dutch lady that was in Santa Cruz and apt us right on those big beaches where the landing exercises were being done. And that's where we learned to swim. Anyway, yeah.
And you were eventually reunited with your father?
We were what?
Were you eventually reunited with your father?
Yeah, in 1946. The war ended August of 1945, officially. Okay? And they finally found him. The Red Cross and the Dutch legation and other countries were all doing, trying to do their duty and everything to find the former prisoners of war of their nationality. And they finally found my father, and they put him on a plane with others back to San Francisco. And that's where we met him, at San Francisco Airport.
Okay.
Yeah, right. Yeah. He had a famous saying that when he met up with us. Geez, I can't remember, but it was good. My father was a pretty humorous guy, so he usually made fun out of bad stuff, you know. Yeah. We could hardly get a word about the prison camp or anything out of him, you know. He just would say, I'd forgotten about that. So, yeah, so from San Francisco, we went to Peoria, Illinois, where Caterpillar was, and then to Larchmont, New York, and it was in New York where he got an offer to do reconstruction in the Philippines, because the Battle of Manila and so on was really hard. So that's where we grew up until 1955, and then I ended up at UW-Madison.
And yeah, then I guess that's full circle back to
full circle, right? To Pewaukee. Right. You know, people always ask me, how did you end up in Pewaukee? And why Pewaukee? Why did you go there? You had a chance to go everywhere else. And I said, my brother and I discovered that this place, this upper Midwest, has the strongest workforce in the whole United States or around in the Philippines, especially in the Philippines, so on. And we said, that's why we stayed here. Good people. No, it wasn't hard. Yeah.
Sorry.
That's it.
All right. In closing, this has been an interview of Peter Harken regarding his service during the Vietnam War period. My name is Will Beres. The time is 5:15 p.m. Oh, thank you for agreeing to this interview, and most importantly, thank you for your service.
Okay. Thanks, Will. We'll see each other. He lives